Hello Year 10. So in today's lesson we want to look at how did communism collapse in Europe? How is it the satellite states after decades finally were able to break free from the USSR? Now obviously just a few rules before we begin. Can you make sure you've got quiz 1 from Google Classrooms to complete as we go along when prompted? So I'll tell you when we want to complete this quiz. Please can I ask you to make sure you read the question properly. You only get one go, so take your time with it. Now I'd really recommend, as you're watching this presentation, making notes to help with your revision as you go along as well. Please don't just sit there and go, oh, I'll just remember everything, because you won't. Make some revision notes now. Pages 36 to 37 in the revision guide will help you with this. And the quiz needs to be submitted to your teacher by Sunday the 10th of May at 5 p.m. and you'll get your quiz score straight away. So it all starts off in Poland with Solidarity. Solidarity was a trade union group. It was full of workers who basically wanted to have more of a say in the workplace. They didn't want the Communist Party to control everything in the factories. They wanted the right to be able to go on strike and to have a say in changes that affected the working conditions. And as you can imagine, the Communist Party didn't like the idea of this at all. They wanted complete control. They didn't want the workers to have a voice. Now, Solidarity was made illegal in 1981 to stop this opposition. The leader was arrested and it was illegal to become a member of the Solidarity Party. And the USSR had hoped this would just stop the opposition completely. Solidarity was no longer a thing. But if we remember, in 1985, the Reagan Doctrine had taken effect, saying that the USA would support anti-communist groups trying to overthrow their governments. This was a great opportunity for America to prove that doctrine by supporting the anti-communists, by supporting Solidarity, who were trying to overthrow the communists in Poland. And you get this unbelievable meeting up between these two people, Ronald Reagan, who hated communism and was religious, and you also get Pope John Paul, who obviously was religious and also hated communism. He was Polish. He hated what the Communist Party were doing to the Poles. He hated the fact that they were suppressing the religion. The Polish people couldn't be free to worship. If you remember, communism believes in atheism. There's no religion at all, and so both of these people felt they were on a mission from God. In fact, both of them had been shot in 1981, and they both felt they'd been saved by God, that they were doing God's work. So what do we see as a result? We see the two most powerful people in the world, you could argue, the Pope and the President, working together. Ronald Reagan gives $50 million to Solidarity to keep them going in secret. And the Pope helps to smuggle technology into Poland to keep the trade union group going. Things like tape recorders, typing equipment and so on, so that Solidarity could keep going in secret. The Polish communists thought they'd got rid of it, but really they hadn't at all. Solidarity was kept alive for years and years and years. And this is the first time that we see an American president get directly involved in a Soviet state. If you think about things like Hungary and Czechoslovakia before, America hadn't got involved. Now we're seeing direct interference. So, the year turns to 1988 and Solidarity takes to the streets. They've been kept alive and now they are protesting. And Solidarity essentially wanted a free election and for them to go against the communists for control of Poland. They wanted more of a say, they wanted greater freedom. Now if we think back to the Brezhnev Doctrine, just pause the video here for a second. What was the Brezhnev Doctrine? And when did it happen? After which event? And when you think you've remembered, press play to continue. So hopefully you've remembered that the Brezhnev Doctrine was, if any satellite state tries to leave the Warsaw Pact, USSR would use force if needed to stop this. That Russia would not let any satellite states leave at all. And this came as a result of the Czech uprising of 1968. But Gorbachev announced that this was rejected in 1988. He said the Brezhnev Doctrine was no more. Russia didn't follow that. The USSR didn't follow that anymore. And the reason for that is because they were spending 25% of their gross national product, the the entire value of the country, on military and arms. And Gorbachev said, this is ridiculous. We're having to spend so much on the military to keep these countries with us. It's not worth it anymore. Now, this freedom for countries to do what they like now without the USSR interfering is the key to communism collapsing the following year in 1989. Because in 1989, a free election is held. You've got Solidarity, this small little trade union group, up against the communists who control the media, they've got all the propaganda, all the censorship, and yet in June 1989, it's a landslide win for Solidarity. Solidarity take power. There is a non-communist government in the satellite states. And everyone is watching. Everyone is wondering, what is Gorbachev going to do now? Behind the Iron Curtain, there is a capitalist country. When will Gorbachev send the army in? Just like Brezhnev would have done. Just like Stalin would have done. But Gorbachev does nothing at all. Now, this was furthered because Hungary had opened up its border with Austria. And so now there was a gap in the Iron Curtain as well. People could go on holiday to Hungary from any of the satellite states and then go straight through the gap. And this made the Iron Curtain seem far weaker as well, the fact there was a gap in it. There's no point having this whole blockade around Europe. If you've got a hole in it, people can get through. And these two events started to show people that change was coming. The fact Gorbachev did nothing about either event here. And the 11th of September, 125,000 East Germans crossed the border in a day. People were leaving, if you can see on the map, East Germany. They were going to Hungary, and they were just going through that gap in the Iron Curtain to Austria on the other side. And so now more and more people were leaving these communist areas. Now, Gorbachev was aware of this, and Gorbachev's government had come up with a new doctrine. But it's quite typical of this change in policy that Gorbachev didn't name this after himself, but the government named it after Frank Sinatra, pictured here on the right, who was a famous American singer at the time. And Sinatra came up with a song called My Way, which promoted independence, people doing what they wanted to do. Well, the Sinatra Doctrine on the 20th of October 1989 said that countries were free to make their own decisions, that the USSR would not intervene if any countries moved away from communism now. It was their call. And as you can imagine, the people in the satellite states now wanted communism gone. They wanted freedom. November the 4th, we see 1 million people protest in East Berlin. They want the wall knocked down. They want freedom to travel again. November the 9th, the border is opened. The East Germans were able to move freely into West Germany, and the wall was basically mostly knocked down. Some of it still stands intact to places, but large parts of that wall were knocked down. And we see Germany start to be reunited here. Families could reunite. They'd not seen each other for 30 years in some cases. And so we end up with this symbol of the Cold War being taken down. It showed that actually the USSR control of Europe was being removed. Now, don't mention this in your exam, but it is quite interesting to know, and that's the fact that David Hasselhoff, he's the one from Knight Rider, Baywatch, I think he's got a cameo in the Guardians of the Galaxy too, SpongeBob as well. Well, he's had a single about freedom, and that had spent 9 weeks at #1 in Germany during spring 1989, this key year. And they were so convinced that Hasselhoff was such a key part of that he was invited to sing on the Berlin Wall on New Year's Eve 1989 in a crane with a jacket on, with Christmas lights on, and a piano scarf as well. So don't mention that in your exam, but actually you could argue that David Hasselhoff helped keep that passion going about freedom during this key year. So in other events, November 1989, non-violent protests in Czechoslovakia. And this was called the Velvet Revolution because there were hardly any deaths at all, no real violence, and the communist government just steps down completely. However, you could see a contradiction in December 1989 in Romania, where the communist leader Ceausescu was overthrown violently. He tried to escape and they caught him. He was put on trial on live TV, and found guilty, he was executed by a firing squad with his wife on December the 25th. But the key part here is the Warsaw Pact had effectively ended. All of the satellite states you see, the countries that are in light pink there, they all turned capitalist. For the first time in decades, they were independent, they were not controlled by Moscow. Europe was reunited. Now, we need to try to understand why this happened, and here's a key point here. Gorbachev was a communist, but he knew he couldn't afford to intervene with other countries when they tried to break free. It was simply too expensive for the USSR. Now, as soon as Gorbachev announces this and says that countries were free to make decisions with the Brezhnev Doctrine and the USSR would not invade, that just encouraged protest and change in those satellite states. And the people had also been encouraged because of things like perestroika and glasnost that you looked at last lesson in the USSR. Gorbachev wanted to improve communism, not destroy it, but actually other countries didn't share his views. Gorbachev wanted the other countries to appreciate communism, and that's why perestroika and glasnost were brought in. But ultimately, these satellite states just wanted it gone, and that's clear in the protests of 1989, where they were allowed to do just that. So, that's the end of this first lesson for this week. Can you have a look, please, at Quiz 1 on Google Classrooms? Like I said, please read the question carefully. Don't drop marks because you didn't read the question. And once you're completed, please move on to the second PowerPoint and quiz for the end of today's lessons. Thank you very much.